Welcome to those of you who have already signed in. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for late stragglers to show up, and then we'll be beginning our presentation. In case you're wondering, behind me is the Erechtheum from one of the buildings on the Acropolis with the Caryatids, and this background is in honor of our speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Buller, who is a classicist. Before we begin the presentation, I just want to remind all of you that if you have any questions, um, use the Q&A option during the presentation to lodge your questions, and then we will try to answer as many of them as we can afterwards. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Buller, who is a nationally recognized authority on classical literature and its influence on modern opera. He has published extensively on such topics as Greek tragedy, Latin pedagogy, Baroque music, and the careers of 20th century classical singers. Dr. Buller received his BA in classical and modern languages from the University of Notre Dame and his MA and PhD in classics from the University of Wisconsin. His academic credentials are so vast that an entire hour would be needed to list them. He is the author of more than a dozen books on higher education and well more than 200 articles, essays, and reviews. From 2003 to 2005, Dr. Buller served as the principal English language lecturer at the International Wagner Festival in Bayreuth. Dr. Buller has held 2 Fulbright fellowships, is a member of several academic fraternities, and a number of regional societies devoted to the study of either Wagner or classical literature. Dr. Buller speaks frequently to professional groups on a variety of issues, including higher education, classical literature, and Wagner. We welcome Dr. Buller today, who will be speaking on the fliegende Hollander after the storm. So, Dr. Buller.
Thank you. Let me just take a minute to get things started. There. Andy, can you see my screen now?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, very good. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. I'm delighted to share this talk with you. I was looking over the names of the people as they were signing in, and it was a great delight to see a number of familiar names from presentations I've given in the past, and also some new names. So I'm hoping to make some new friends in the current situation. As Andy said, I'm a classicist, and I'm really interested in the history of ideas, how the ideas of one great genius can influence other people in his or her own time, and also how the ideas of one age can influence another. And in particular, what interests me is the use of imagery, all different kinds of images, similes, metaphors, themes, symbols, and of course, leitmotifs, because if you think about it, a leitmotif is a kind of image. And an image is something that compares two things that aren't alike, and yet draws a comparison between them. If we say, he's as strong as an ox, well, he's not an ox, but we see something about him from that comparison. Well, a leitmotif is a little bit like that. We have some music that sounds like the flickering of fire, and we're reminded of the actual phenomenon of fire. Well, in The Flying Dutchman, one of the most common musical images we have, and one of the most common literary images that we have in the work, is the storm. It is so common that back in 1864, before a performance, the conductor, Franz Lachner, said, wherever you open the score of The Flying Dutchman, the wind blows out of it. Well, what does he mean by this? Well, we can hear it right at the very beginning of the work, the first part of the overture, where we hear a storm arise and then subside. And I'd like to show that to you now as we hear a version of just the beginning of the overture played by the Frankfurt Radio Symphony. Wow, what an opening for a work. And you almost just feel that storm arise and it reach its crescendo and then subside. Now, if that work were not a 19th century work, but were a 21st century work, or even a 20th century work, we would know what to expect after that storm arises and fades. Because works affect us, whether we're consciously aware of them or not. We get images in our mind that we retain from other works of literature that we've read, other movies that we've seen, other operas that we've seen, other compositions. And so for us in the 20th century, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, there is an image that stays with us. And I'm going to show you that image, and this may be something you haven't seen for many years, or maybe you saw it yesterday. And many of you probably saw it a number of times, maybe several dozen of times. But it lurks in our memory, and it affects what we expect to see after the storm. And here's the scene.
He must be up inside the cyclone! Oh, the Scott!
we're not in Kansas anymore.
That phrase, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore, that means to us that a transition has occurred, where we've gone from the world of ordinary experience to a magical place, to a magic land, to a place that we almost cannot imagine. Well, in literature, we call that a liminal experience. That's just a fancy way of saying it's a gateway experience, a doorway experience from one world to another. And for us in the 21st century, that's how we think of storms at the beginning of work, because we've been influenced by The Wizard of Oz, which takes us from that storm through from a black and white world to a technicolor world, from reality to fantasy, from the dull world of Kansas to the magical world of Oz. Well, as I say, that's what we expect in the 21st century. But of course, L. Frank Baum wrote his book, The Wonderful World of Oz, in 1900. That was 17 years after Wagner died. And the MGM film didn't come out for 39 years later. So it's not as though Wagner could have been drawing upon those images. He couldn't have been aware of them. But ideas don't arise out of nowhere. And even in the Romantic period, even before L. Frank Baum, even before Wagner, people were aware that storms at the beginning of works took you to another world. It goes back almost to as early as Western literature begins. Right at the beginning of Virgil's Aeneid, there's a storm that drives Aeneas off course and takes him from the land of Troy that he's trying to escape from the war, and takes him to the land of Carthage. Shakespeare's Tempest begins with a storm. In fact, you could think of the Tempest as almost like Shakespeare's equivalent of The Wizard of Oz. It takes a group of people, not just one, but a group of people, to this magical land where they have these experiences, they grow from those experiences, and then they go home. Even in Wagner's own day, or shortly before, Bellini's Il Pirata begins with a storm and takes that crew of that ship to a land where they're exposed to a different way of life. And although the work doesn't actually begin with a storm, the central figure in the Odyssey, Odysseus, is constantly driven off course by a storm. And that's a very important work for Wagner. He mentions in his autobiographical sketch that I passed in my school for a good head in literature. Even in the third form, I had translated the first 12 books of the Odyssey. Now, sometimes people read that and they say, well, obviously, Wagner's exaggerating here, and we know he exaggerates in his autobiographical statements. You could possibly be in the third form and be translating that much ancient Greek. The third form is about the equivalent of our 6th grade, 7th grade. No student that young can do that. But what you have to understand is that the grammar of the Odyssey isn't particularly difficult. In fact, there's one modern textbook series written in the United States that introduces Greek from the very beginning by using the Odyssey. So it's a good beginning work for someone who's studying the ancient language. And then in Mein Leben, Wagner says that even as a child, he'd produced a written translation of 12 books of the Odyssey. That may be a little bit more of a translation, of an exaggeration, if you're thinking of a written translation as being something like a publishable translation. But if it just meant that he translated the first 12 books of the Odyssey in his notebook or something, that's perfectly believable. But this is a work that Wagner knew and returned to throughout his life. You find copies of it in translation in his library in Bayreuth. Well, storms are a constant theme in the Odyssey. Storm sort of begins Odysseus's whole adventure. He's trying to go home to Ithaca from Troy, and a storm drives him and his men off course to the island of the Lotus Eaters. And then all this magical experience begins to occur. When he's in the cave of the Cyclops, Odysseus tells the Cyclops that they're a group of warriors returning from Troy, going home, and blown off course by a storm. Now, he tells the Cyclops a lot of lies too, but that one statement is true. That happened to them. And then when Odysseus is sailing away from the island of the Cyclops, he taunts the Cyclops, he insults the Cyclops, and the Cyclops tosses a mountain towards the sea, and it washes Odysseus and his fleet off to the floating island of Elis, so he can have more adventures. Aeolus is like the opposite of the Cyclops. The Cyclops was a terrible host. He wanted to eat Odysseus and his men. Aeolus is a generous host. He takes them in, he feeds them, and as his parting gift to Odysseus, he takes all the bad winds, all the winds that would keep him from going home, and he stuffs them in a bag so they can't affect Odysseus' voyage, and ties them up and gives them to Odysseus, so he'll only have the one good wind he needs to take him back to Ithaca. Well, Odysseus' ship sails close enough to Ithaca that you can see the shore, and Odysseus is overcome by exhaustion, and he falls asleep. And the men are wondering, what's in that bag that Aeolus gave him? Is it gold? Is it treasure? Is it something else valuable? Is it rubies? And so they open it up, and all the bad winds escape, and once again it blows Odysseus off course, and he doesn't return home yet. Yet another storm prevents him from leaving the island where Hyperion, the sun, keeps his cattle. And there again, he falls asleep. And while he's asleep, some of his men eat some of those cattle. And so when they try to sail away, Zeus destroys their ship with a lightning bolt. And when Odysseus is leaving the island of Calypso, on a raft, Poseidon destroys the raft in a storm. So storm after storm drives Odysseus off course, but it continues his adventure, keeps taking him back to a magic land, to an incredible place. Well, storms in these works of literature tend to cause worlds to collide. They tend to cause the people who live in a mundane world to take them to a magic land. That, as I say, happened in the Aeneid. They're leaving Troy and they come to the peaceful land of Carthage. So they leave a world of war and come to a land of peace. In Shakespeare's Tempest, they leave the dull land of Milan and come to Prosperous Island where things are magical. In Il Pirata, they leave a world of violence and arrive in a world of forgiveness. So Gualtiero, the pirate of the title, is a figure of savagery, but he meets Imogen, who is an embodiment of civilization. And as we just saw in the Odyssey, storms take people from the world of humans to the world of gods and monsters. Well, what are these magic lands like? Well, we get a good summary of them from that work that I mentioned before, from The Wizard of Oz, where near the end of the picture, Dorothy says, I remember some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful. That's what we expect magic lands to be. There are going to be challenges, there are going to be threats, there's going to be conflict, and yet most of it is going to be beautiful. So what kind of gateway do we have with this storm that introduces the Flying Dutchman? Well, we get a hint of it in the helmsman's song that occurs right at the beginning of the opera. Now, just to remind you of what's happened, Daland, who is Centa's father, has been driven off course by a storm, as we would expect from all these other stories that I've just mentioned. His ship has just been cast ashore, and Daland and his men head off for some rest. So they go off and they fall asleep. And only one person is left awake, and that's the helmsman. And this is what he says in the following scene. We're going to see a production today by the Livermore Valley Opera that I've chosen for a number of reasons. And the helmsman here is Mason Gates. And here's what he says following the storm when he's the only person awake after that experience.
Mit Gewitter und Sturm aus ferner Meer, mein Meer in dir nah. Über Turm und Flut vom Süden her, mein Meer, ich bin da. Mein Mädel, wenn ich Südwind fahr, ich nimmer wohl käm zu dir. Ach, lieber Südwind, bloß noch mehr. Mein Mädel verlangt nach mir. Ja, hallo, ja, hallo. Ja, Prinz geschah aus weitem Land. Ich hab und ich gerannt. Durch Gewitter und Meer vom Mohrenstrand. Habt ihr was mitgebracht? Mein Mädel, preis sehen Sie den hoch, ich bring dir ein Güldenband. Ach, lieber Silvent, blaset doch, mein Mädel hat gern den Tand.
And so the helmsman too falls asleep. I'm always interested in how different companies stage different scenes. And one of the things I really like about how that particular scene was staged was, what is that white piece of cloth that he wraps himself in before he gives that last part of the aria and then lies down? Is it a bit of sail? Is he reinforcing the image that this is a story about sailors? But you know, it almost looks like a shroud. And if you think about how Wagner uses images, in Wagner frequently, sleep is a symbol of death, or at least of mortality. You know, in The Ring, if a character falls asleep, you know that that character is doomed. Sometimes minutes later, sometimes acts later, but that's a symbol of mortality. And so by staging this particular scene in this way and having the helmsman fall asleep, which itself is a symbol of death, and then wrapped in what looks like a shroud, the director seems to be reinforcing that notion. Well, what else does this helmsman's song tells us? First of all, you've got to admit, it has lots of storm imagery in it. He talks about it being in the midst of thunder and storms, through towering waves from the south, through storms and seas. There's that. But there's also something else. He talks a lot about being far from home and longing for home. That makes us suspect that this story is going to be what we call a nostos, a homecoming. You know, the Odyssey is a nostos. It's a story about how you get home from a distant place, from a difficult place. The Wizard of Oz is a homecoming story. So this causes us to expect that what we're going to see is a type of homecoming. But what kind of homecoming do we have in The Flying Dutchman? What does going home mean? And we see all this longing for home as he talks about this lass that he's going, his girlfriend that he's going back to, how he's brought her a gift. And those images are going to become important later on in the opera as well. Well, then, as we see, the helmsman falls asleep, and then worlds really do collide. This next scene we're going to see happens immediately after the last one you just saw, and something magical occurs on the stage. Here it is. We'll talk about worlds colliding. That ship almost seems to collide with the stage itself. And in fact, in some productions, artistic directors have done this. What we're seeing right now is some images from the Gewandhaus in Leipzig, where the ship actually juts out into the audience. And I actually saw a production of The Flying Dutchman in Berlin in 1997 that did something very similar to this. For a while, I even thought it might be by the same artistic director. It's not, but it was the same sort of image. And sort of a strange thing, it was the only time I've ever had a front row seat in an opera. Usually that's not my favorite seat. I like to sit about halfway back. The sound is better there. But I bought the ticket at the last minute. The only seat that was available was right in the middle of the front row. And when that ship began to come out over the orchestra into the audience, it was really a frightening moment. It was almost like it was coming right at you. And that's how this magical world intrudes upon our own in The Flying Dutchman. So what is it that we're supposed to imagine that we're seeing here? Well, I hate to keep going back to The Wizard of Oz, but there are so many parallels that we sort of have to keep mentioning. What happens in that story? Did Dorothy actually go to Oz, or was it all a dream? You know, if you read the books, she actually went somewhere because there are sequels. She goes back to Oz multiple times. But in the movie, you get the impression that she was bummed on the head by a window that blew open, and it's all a dream. Well, we can ask ourselves the same question when we're watching The Flying Dutchman. What is it that we're seeing? Are we supposed to believe this is actually happening? Or remember, the helmsman falls asleep right before this happens. Is all the rest of the opera just the helmsman's dream? You could certainly stage it that way. If you wanted to have him sleeping on stage for all the rest of the opera, that would really seem to imply that. But that's a possibility that we can create for ourselves if that's our interpretation of the opera. And if it is a dream, what kind of dream is it? Is it a nightmare? Well, it certainly could be. I mean, what do you see? You see this ship with black masts and deep red sails. Black and red, that's the colors of evil. That's the colors of death, the colors of Satan. This could well be a nightmare that the helmsman is having. Or perhaps it's a chance for redemption that we might be seeing. And these are the questions that arise in our mind as this opera begins. Well, there's one sort of peculiar thing about this scene, and that is that everyone we've met so far, every single person now, is asleep. Dalin's asleep, the crew is asleep, the helmsman is asleep, but the Dutchman's going to be awake. And remember what I said before, sleep is a symbol of death, or a symbol of mortality. And who is the Dutchman? He is the man who cannot die. That is his curse. We don't tend to think of eternal life as being a curse, but that is the story of the Dutchman. So in 1841, 13 years before Wagner read the works of Schopenhauer, we already have an anticipation of Götterdämmerung, an opera that deals with the idea that non-existence is not our curse. Life is our curse. Well, that's how the Dutchman introduces himself. And we're going to hear his introduction to us in a famous performance, actually a 1929 recording of one of the most famous passages in the entire work. And the Dutchman here is sung by one of the most famous Dutchmen of the early 20th century, Friedrich Schor. We don't have a stage version, but you're going to see the translation on the screen and also some notes about what's going on or what the background of the story is. So here's the 1929 version of the Dutchman's introduction to us, sung by Friedrich Schor.
Verstrichen sind sie
Jahr. Voll Überdruss wirft mich das Meer ans Land. Ah, stolzer Ozean, in kurzer Frist sollst du mich wieder tragen. Dein Herz ist beugsam, doch ewig meine Qual. Das Heil, das auf dem Land ich suche, nie werd ich es finden. Euch des Wellmes Bluten bleib ich getreu, bis eure letzte Welle sich bricht und euer letztes Nass verzehrt. Wie oft in Meerestiefen stund, stürzt sich vor See durch mich in Haar, doch, den Tod, ich fand ihn nicht. Aber der Schiff im furchtbar Grab, tritt mein Schiff nicht zum siebten Grund, doch mein Grab beschloss sich nicht. Erwähnen droht ich den Piraten, in denen Kampfe auf sie Tod, rief ich, zeige deine Taten, voll Scherzen, volle Schiff und Boot. Doch ach, des Meers barbarscher Sohn, empfang das Kreuz und geht davon. Wie oft in Meerestiefsten Grund steht sich voll Sehnsucht Wegen nach. Doch ohne Schiffe furchtbar Grab, tritt mein Schiff nicht auf siebten Grund. Nirgends ein Grab, dem Hals vertraut. Diese verdammnis Reckenwort, diese verdammnis Reckenwort. Gepriesner Engel Gottes, der meines Heils Bedingung mir gewahrt, war ich unsilger Spielwerk deines Spottes, als die Erlösung du mir zeigtest an. werde ich ihn nicht vergehen, werde ich ihn nicht vergehen. Von alle Toten auferstehen, dann werde ich ihn nicht vergehen, ihn nicht vergehen. Wir
That's our introduction to the Dutchman and his longing for non-existence. Worlds, end your course. Eternal destruction, take me. His curse is to live forever. Now, The Flying Dutchman is a very early work by Wagner. It's the earliest work performed these days at Bayreuth, and yet it anticipates so many works that come after it. The Dutchman anticipates Wotan in The Ring, who says, the only thing I want yet is the end, the end. And it anticipates Hans Sachs in Meistersinger, when the Dutchman talks about Wahn, madness, delusion. Everything in the world is nothing but madness, nothing but delusion. And it anticipates the theme of searching for redemption that we have in Parsifal. So here, even though we have this extremely early work by Wagner, we have the seeds that are going to grow into so much of his later work as his compositional style matures, as his intellectual growth matures, and yet it's all still here right at the beginning of his work. Well, that's where the Dutchman is going. But where did this strange image come from? Where did Wagner get this idea? Well, the idea starts in this anti-Semitic legend that starts in the late 12th, early 13th century, the legend of the wandering Jew. And the legend is told in a variety of forms, but in many of them, the story is this. Jesus has just been condemned to death by Pontius Pilate, and he's leaving to go to his crucifixion. And there's a Jew who's standing there who says, hurry along, you're slowing things up. And Jesus turns to him and says, I have a right to rest, but you will have no rest. You will wander forever. Well, this is sort of popular culture story, is sort of told by word of mouth for centuries. And then in 1783, Christian Schubart writes a poem, The Eternal Jew, a lyrical rhapsody. And this element from popular culture enters the world of high culture. And we start seeing it show up in literature. 1811, Achim von Arnim writes a double drama, Halle und Jerusalem. Halle, that's a school drama that takes place in the university town in Germany, Halle. And the Jerusalem part, that's the Wandering Jew story. Well, in 1834, Karl Löwe sets another poem, a poem by Schreiber, The Eternal Jew, to music. And 1836, Nicholas Lenau writes a poem on this theme. And then, remember, The Flying Dutchman is performed for the first time in 1841. The very next year, and for the next 2 years, Jean Su writes a 10-volume novel that comes out in installments. The Wandering Jew, sort of returning this story to popular culture. Now, it's interesting how Sue handles this story. It always reminds me of that 1960s television show, The Fugitive, where the fugitive is running from town to town, and each week has a different adventure in a different town. Well, that's kind of how Sue uses this image in his story as the Wandering Jew moves about Europe. He has different stories in different towns. Well, there's a similar figure that we're probably familiar with in English literature, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the poem that starts, "It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three." His curse, too, is that he cannot die. As he says at one point, "The many men so beautiful, and they all dead did lie, and 1,000 slimy things lived on. And so did I. So this is another one of these seagoing figures who's longing for death, who's longing for his existence to end. Well, where does this Dutchman connection come in? Well, in one famous early work, 1821, John Howison writes a story for a magazine called Vanderdecken's Message Home. And still today, some people in some programs of the Flying Dutchman will call the Dutchman Vanderdecken. Wagner never calls him that, but it comes from this particular story. And we have the sort of the basic story of the Flying Dutchman appear in that work. In 1826, it's dramatized by Edward Fitzbaum, who writes the story The Flying Dutchman or the Phantom Ship, and it's performed in London. And then in 1831, Heinrich Heine writes a story called From the Memoirs of Herr von Schnabelowski. And that has the Flying Dutchman almost in the exact form of the story that we know it. And Wagner knew that. Here's how Heine tells the story. You certainly know the fable of the Flying Dutchman. And that's a line I want you to remember. Because when we come to scene 3 in the work, the men's chorus is going to say exactly that. It's a quote right out of Heine. You certainly know the fable of the Flying Dutchman. It's the story of an enchanted ship that can never arrive in port, and that, since time immemorial, has been sailing about at sea. That timber spectre, that grim gray ship, is so called from the captain, a Hollander, who once swore by all the devils that we'd get around a certain mountain, whose name has escaped me, in spite of a fearful storm, though we should sail to the day of judgment. The devil took him at his word, therefore he must sail forever, until set free by a woman's truth. And there we have, in its essence, in its outline, the story of the Flying Dutchman as Wagner presents it to us. So how does Wagner use all of that, everything we've been talking about so far, the storm imagery, this transportation of people to a magical place, and the story of the Flying Dutchman? Well, this is the world he creates in scene 1. It's a frightening world. It's a supernatural world. It's a dark world. It's a male world. If you think about it, every single character we've seen so far has been male. It's a world filled with sleep and dreams, and it's a world characterized by storms. If you were to ask the question that's posed to Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, are you a good witch or a bad witch? This is definitely bad witch territory. This is nightmare territory. Well, immediately thereafter, after the Dutchman introduces himself to us, Daland wakes up and he meets the Dutchman. The Dutchman hears that Daland has an unmarried daughter named Senta. Remember, he can only be freed from his curse of living forever if he finds a woman who's going to be faithful to him. And he only has a limited amount of time on land to do so. So without hearing anything more, the Dutchman asks Daland for her hand in marriage. And to sweeten the deal, he offers a chest of a treasure as a gift. Well, Daland, we learn, is characterized by his greed. And tempted by that wealth, Daland agrees to the marriage. The south wind suddenly begins to blow again, and both vessels can sail towards Daland's home. Well, we're moving at this point from scene 1 to scene 2. And what did I just say? We saw in scene 1 this frightening, supernatural, dark, male world that's filled with sleep and dreams and characterized by storms. What we're now going to see in scene 2 is the polar opposite of that. We're going to go to a peaceful world, a mundane world, a bright world, a female world, where most of the characters we're going to see in scene 2 are women. We're going to go to a world that's filled with wakefulness and activity, not sleep and dreams, and it's a world that's characterized by calm. So to put it another way, if scene 1 was the thesis, scene 2 is going to be the antithesis. And Wagner's going to get us there in a very interesting way. We actually hear this transition in the music that connects scene 1 to scene 2. We're going to listen to a recording now from the Bayreuth Festival Orchestra in 1855. And I chose this particular passage because you're going to see the music right there on the screen. And if you can read music, watch for the double dotted notes and how Wagner uses that to transform us from where we are in scene 1 to scene 2. If you don't read music, don't worry, I'll explain it after we hear the music. But here's the transition that we have from scene 1 to scene 2 of The Flying Dutchman. we just heard, in that transition from scene 1 to scene 2, we're supposed to be hearing the sailors tugging at the ropes, and we have that double dotted rhythm. Da, 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 dun, 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 da, da, dun, 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 dun. And then when scene 2 begins and the women are spinning at their spinning wheels, they spin their spinning wheels to the very same rhythm. So there you have that double dotted rhythm in both places. It's a musical transition that takes us from one world to another world that's going to be very different from what we've just seen. Well, Senta and her companions are engaged in spinning thread, and that itself is an image, because traditionally that's a female activity. Sailing is a traditional male activity. Men go off to sea and women stay at home and they spin. And we get certain expressions from that. We sometimes talk, well, not so much anymore, but there's this archaic expression, the distaff side, meaning the female side of the family. And we have the word spinsters, so women who don't get married, so they stay at home spinning thread. Well, that's what we're going to see is women engage in this traditional activity of spinning. But they aren't just spinning thread. They're also spinning stories. And that's why we have this interesting contrast here. Remember the helmsman's song? If we regard scene 1 as the thesis, what does he say? My lover is at home. I'm far away from home. I need to get back home. Well, the women's song is now the antithesis. My lover is far away from home. I'm at home. He needs to come home. So we have the opposite of that in the song that the women sing. Well, Senta's not interested in all that foolishness. She's not interested in that. She's preoccupied with her dream of the ideal man she's seen in a painting, the mysterious Dutchman. And so she doesn't want to sing along with everyone else. And so when she doesn't, she's tried, well, then sing something better. And the result is Senta's Ballad, one of the most famous parts of the music drama. Interestingly enough, it's one of the earliest parts of The Flying Dutchman that Wagner wrote. He actually wrote this ballad before he was even finished with the libretto. And we're going to hear it sung now by Maria Pleta in the same production we've been seeing before, the Livermore Valley Opera. And here is Senta's Ballad presented in that version.
No.
what are some of the repeated items that we hear in Senta's ballad? We hear repeatedly, the Dutchman is pale. We hear he's restless. He never have a moment of peace to himself. We keep hearing about the faithful woman and the need for redemption. And so what you have in the parallel between Die Vries and Senta's ballad is a lot of retelling of the story from the mouths of two different characters. Both of them mention the 7-year term that the Dutchman can only come to the shore once every 7 years, his search for redemption, the angel of God who made this compact that's the only way he can escape his fate if he finds that one faithful woman. They both repeat that. And yet, there's also a transition, that notion of the Dutchman being pale. Up until this point, everything that we've heard about the Dutchman has been dark and foreboding. Everything about his clothing has been described as dark. But Senta can only see how wan and pale he is. Now, partially that's because he's a ghostly figure, but also we're seeing a transition possibly in the Dutchman himself as he enters this world very different from the world that we saw in scene 1. And for me, it raises an interesting question. Through whose eyes do we see this drama? I already mentioned one possibility. The whole thing could be the helmsman's dream. That's one possibility. I don't imagine most people see it that way, but it's a possibility. But also, whose story really is it? Is it the Dutchman's story? Is he sort of our representative on the stage? Is he the person that we identify with most, as the name of the work might seem to imply? Or is Senta really the central character, as the person whose life is most affected by the Dutchman? You know, there's this saying that's been attributed to just about everyone, including Leo Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. There are only two kinds of stories. A man goes on a journey and a stranger comes to town. It actually isn't a very old statement at all. The modern author, John Gardner, said it. Well, which story do we have here? Is it a story of a man going on a journey? Is it the Dutchman story? Or is it a story of how a stranger comes to town, sort of like Die Meistersinger, where someone comes from outside and changes the world that the stranger enters? Well, we can decide that as we watch the work. Our response might be dictated by our gender, which character we happen to identify with, our mood on that particular day, or it can be also determined by the director's choice. One famous example is the Harry Kupfer Bayreuth production that began in 1978, where he saw the whole story as really being Senta's dream, not the helmsman's dream, but Senta's dream. And as an indication of that, he had Lisbeth Baltzlev, who was his Senta, clutch the portrait of the Dutchman almost consistently throughout that entire production. Another production that did something similar, but took it even to the next level, was the famous Klaus Guth production in Bayreuth that began in 2003, where his Senta was Adrian Duggar, and he does something even more dramatic than the version that we just saw. First of all, this is the set where all of the story of the Dutchman takes place, and you'll notice a couple things about it. First of all, notice the Dutchman and Daland on stage. They're always made to resemble one another. We're sort of given the impression that Senta has a father fixation, which is sometimes called daddy issues. You know, the man that she admires, the man that she wants to fall in love with, is a man very much like her father, or perhaps even is her father. But also notice how the house seems to be constructed. The top half is a mirror image of the bottom half. Senta is almost on the verge of madness in this production, and her house is completely turned topsy-turvy in her mind, and everything that happens in the story is said to have occurred in her imagination. Here's one scene, for instance, where the sailors are in a storm, but really that's just the child Senta, a young girl who plays Senta at this point, who playing with a ship that's in the waters as she goes up the stairs to her room. Well, how we see this story has a lot of different possibilities. We can determine that, our director can determine that, and it has many different dimensions that we can take. And whichever one we do take, into this world, into this strange world, Eric walks in. He's a creature who's very different from the sort of strange people that we've seen so far, like the Dutchman. Interestingly enough, he is another outsider. The Dutchman is an outsider. He's an immortal in a world of mortals. Senta is an outsider. She's a dreamer in that world of mundane domesticity of people spinning thread. Well, Eric's going to be an outsider too, a hunter in a world of sailors. And he is the man that everyone, including Eric himself, expects Senta to marry. Well, this is a pattern we're kind of all familiar with. If you go to romantic comedies, if you go to rom-coms, frequently there is what we call the rom-com boyfriend. This is the boyfriend at the beginning of the movie that the main female character is going to cast off by the end of the movie, where she ends up with a person she's really supposed to be in love with, who is the handsome male lead. And there are actors who sort of made careers out of playing the rom-com boyfriend. Greg Kinnear was one. He's the cast-off boyfriend in You've Got Mail and Someone Like You. Even more, Bill Pullman played this role many times. It's in Sleepless in Seattle, League of Their Own, Mr. Wrong. In fact, Mr. Wrong was a movie that was actually based on this very common stereotypical image of the rom-com boyfriend. Well, that's who Eric is. He's the wrong man for Senta in this story. And like a typical rom-com boyfriend, he tries to persuade Senta that he's the one that she should marry. He warns her that there's this delusion she has about this perfect man, the Dutchman, is just a fantasy. And interestingly enough, he tells her that's all a dream by relating a dream that he himself had. So here we're going to see that scene where he tries to do this. Here's David Gustafson as Eric, and once again we have Maria Plata as Senta. And people often don't think of Eric's dream as being an important part of the Flying. To me, it's a scene that pulls together almost everything we've talked about so far. So to illustrate that, I've actually made some annotations at the top of the screen where I try to point out all of the themes I've been discussing so far showing up in this one particular aria. Here is Eric's dream.
Auf hohem Felsen lag ich träumend, sah unter mir des Meeres Flut. Die Brandung hört ich, wie sie schäumend Maul verbrach, der Wogenflut. Ein fremdes Schiff an nahen Strande erblickt ich, seltsam, wunderbar. Zwei Männer nannten sich dem Lande, der ein, ich sah's, dein Vater war, der andere, wohl erkannt ich ihn, mit schwarzen Wams, die bleiche Mine. Der Seemann, du kommt von außen her, du flogst den Vater zu begrüßen. Doch komm, ich sah ich an dich langen, beschütztest du des fremden Füßen. Ich sah sich deine Knie umfangen, erhebt mich auf an seine Brust. Voll Innsbruck ist du Listerlied, du küssest ihn mit heißer Lust. Sah ich aufs Meer euch fliehen.
My dream spoke truth. It was wahr. And here we have that contrast between madness Wahn and things being true wahr that Wagner returns to in work after work, the contrast between Wahn and wahr. So Eric too was dreaming. He mentioned that right at the very beginning. He was träumend. But also notice the poetry that he uses in this particular passage. Träumend rhyming with schäumend, flute with wut. If you look at that rhyme pattern, it's an A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D rhyme pattern. In other words, it's a very old-fashioned style of poetry. The Dutchman doesn't use this style of poetry when he sings. Senta doesn't use this style of poetry when she sings, but Eric does. And it's Wagner's way of reinforcing for us that Eric is an old-fashioned kind of guy. He's steeped in old-fashioned values, which kind of reinforces his role as an outsider. He's now becoming an outsider to this couple of the Dutchman and Senta that are growing closer. So the stranger, the Dutchman, is becoming the insider, and the former insider, Eric, is becoming the stranger. The world is turning on itself. The world is turning topsy-turvy. Well, the Dutchman finally arrives. Dalent returns home, bringing the stranger with him, and Senta and the Dutchman are introduced, and very, very quickly. They are verbally, but not formally, that's going to be important later, verbally, but not formally engaged. And each sees the other as an answer to their dreams, and scene 2 ends with that. Well, we have the inevitable next step, because what was scene 1 like? It was the thesis, frightening, supernatural, dark, male, sleep and dream, storms. And what was scene 2 like? The opposite of that, peaceful, mundane, bright, female, wakefulness and activity and calm. We know if you have a thesis and an antithesis, scene 3 has to be the synthesis. Well, what kind of synthesis is it going to be in this work? Well, let's follow the transition and see. We're going to start at the end of scene 2, where the Dutchman and Senta are, as I said, informally betrothed to one another, and continue through the transition scene to the beginning of scene 3. The Dutchman here is Philip Skinner. Senta is, once again, Marie Plata. And Dalent is Eugene Brankovino. And here is the transition as we move from scene 2 to scene 3.
Verschönern möcht ich's, kommen es
Sonnen, vor Durst, sie scheinen matt zu sein. Man hört sie nicht. Ei, seht doch nur ein Licht, von der Mannschaft keine Spur.
So we almost have a little bit of a recap of scene 1 and scene 2. Notice how scene 3 begins with the men alone in sort of a dark space and talking about the sailing and storms, and then the women enter, and in this particular production, you'll notice how then the light rises as we move into a world not of darkness, but of light. And so it reminds us of what we've seen before. So what did we just see happen here? We have that thesis from scene 1 and the antithesis from scene 2 coming together, and we have a scene that combines all of this. It's both peaceful and frightening. They're having a party, and yet there's this ghostly ship that they keep talking about. It's mundane, but it's also supernatural because you've got this strange ship that they keep calling out to. It's dark and it's bright, it's male, it's female. They talk about sleep, they talk about wakefulness, and maybe now we have calm after the storm. Well, they keep singing and they keep celebrating, and eventually they wake the dead. The scene always reminds me of the experience you might have if you're staying at a hotel and there is a wedding that goes on to 3 a.m. and you just can't sleep. It's like waking the dead. Well, that's what happens in this particular scene with the revelry of the men and the women. And I'm going to switch performances for just a moment to go to an open-air performance in Finland, because I think this scene happens much more dramatically in this particular version. It doesn't have subtitles, but you don't need them because you can see what happens. The men and the women have been partying so much that they wake up the sailors on the Flying Dutchman. Here's that scene.
Thank you.
The dead keep coming and they keep coming. This is the death intruding on the land of the living. And here's how Wagner himself described what was supposed to be happening in his scene directions. The sea, which everywhere else remains calm, has begun to rise in the vicinity of the Dutch ship. A dull blue flame flares up like a watchfire. And if you know the end of Götterdämmerung, where we have the rising waters and then flame, this is very reminiscent of what happens in that work as well. A storm wind, back to the storm, a storm wind whistles through the rigging, the crew, hitherto invisible, bestir themselves. Well, we have the living and the dead coming into contact with one another in this particular scene, and it can be very frightening on stage if that is the director's choice. Well, in the midst of all of this, once again, Eric returns. He hasn't yet given up on Senta, despite what he said before. He reminds her of a day when she had wrapped him in her arms and told him she loved him. And the Dutchman happens to overhear that conversation. This, again, is a rom-com device. You see it in romantic comedies all the time. The hero of the story, the male lead, overhears a conversation between the rom-com lover and the female lead, misunderstands what's going on, and so you have this area of tension for a while. And just to remind you of how this occurs, I'm going to play a short scene from Notting Hill where exactly this happens. Here's Hugh Grant happening to overhear a conversation that Julia Roberts has. She's going to end up with him. We know she's going to end up with him, but they have to have this little misunderstanding before we can get there.
This is Harry. We'll give you a pair of headphones so you can hear the dialogue.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Hi. Hi. Here we go. Volume's on the side. Have a seat. Thank you. We are living in cloud cuckoo land. We'll never get this done today.
Well, we've got you. I have to be in New York on Thursday.
Oh, stop showing off. God, that's an enormous arse.
I'm not listening.
No, but seriously, it's not fair. So many tragic young teenagers with anorexia. And that girl has an arse she could perfectly well share around with at least 10 other women. Still be big-bottomed.
I would think looking at something nice like that, you and your bony little excuse for an arse would be well advised to keep quiet. Now, down to business, the end of the scene. I ask you when you're telling everyone and you say...
Tomorrow will be soon enough.
And then I... Right.
So who was that rather diffident chap I saw you talking to around the back?
No one. Just some guy from the past. That's a bit of an awkward situation, really. I don't know what he's doing here.
Thanks. I've got to... Anytime.
And he leaves, and that's almost exactly what happens in The Flying Dutchman. The Dutchman sees Eric talking about this scene that happened with Senta and misunderstands what's going on, just as Hugh Grant misunderstands what Julia Roberts is trying to do to put off this other gentleman in that particular scene. Well, the misunderstanding in romantic comedy is going to lead to a temporary breakup, but all is eventually worked out. Usually the right lover rushes to the airport in the final scene of the movie, just before the main character is going to leave forever, fade out, the end. Well, is that what we get in The Dutchman? Well, we get something actually kind of similar. The Dutchman feels he's been betrayed by yet another false woman, so he orders his crew to set sail. He tells Senta that it's a very good thing they weren't formally engaged, otherwise she'd suffer eternal damnation. But Senta doesn't want to be saved. She wants to save him. And so she climbs onto a precipice and calls out, "Here I stand, loyal to you until death. Hier stehe ich, treu dir bis zum Tod." But you think about it, is a really strange thing to say. Here she's standing on this precipice, not at all with firm footing, and she's going to plunge into the sea. She's going to plunge to her death like Tosca, and she's talking about, here I stand, when she's ready to fall. Well, what's happening? Well, some of you probably, I'm sure, hear what's happening in those words, but a 19th century German audience surely heard what Wagner was doing with those particular words. He is echoing Martin Luther at the Diet of Worms when he said, "Hier stehe ich kann nicht anders." Here I stand, I can do nothing else. I've reached the point where I cannot go any further. Or as Popeye says, I stands all I can stand, I can't stand no more. Well, he draws his line in the sand. And Cinta here is drawing her line in the sand. And by using those words, the original audience, at least, is reminded of this very important episode. So she makes a literal leap of faith. And it turns out that everyone's dream has come true. The Dutchman is redeemed. That's been his dream. Cinta is united with the Dutchman. That's been her dream. Daland has his treasure, his wealth. That's been his dream. And Eric's fearful dream has become a reality. Well, let's watch that scene. Here's the end of The Flying Dutchman, and we're going to see the same production we've seen before, so our Cinta is once again a repleta. Here's how the work ends. And The Flying Dutchman ends with the audience ruining it by starting to applaud too soon. Don't you dare do that at Bayreuth. You'll get some very nasty looks if you do that. But that particular ending, the way that was staged, was almost exactly what Wagner described that he wanted people to see in his scenic directions. A scene that would have been very difficult to do with 19th century technology, but is perfectly easy to do with 21st century technology. So who in the end was this strange figure? Who is the Dutchman? What are we supposed to take away from this work? Well, many people have said that the Dutchman is a symbol of the artist, the romantic artist who doesn't fit in. Maybe it's a symbol of Wagner himself, who never really fit in to the society that wanted to constrain him by the standards of the time and what an opera was supposed to be. Or some people say that the Dutchman is supposed to be us. It's supposed to be all of us living this life of an uncertain duration on a voyage that we don't really know where we're going. And in fact, if you think about it, we talked about the storm transporting someone to a magic land. Who actually is transported to the magic land through the storm in this work? We are. So we may well be the Dutchman. Or it may well be a different sort of purpose entirely, where the Dutchman is supposed to be this magical, mysterious figure who comes into our world and teaches us, you think you understand, you think you know, but you don't know, because there are mysteries that you can't understand. The world is much more than you can see in your philosophy, Horatio. Maybe that's what the lesson is of this work. Or maybe it could be any of those, depending upon how we approach the work at any point in our lives or at any particular time. It also could be a reminder that we don't belong in that magic land. We don't belong in that paradise. We don't belong in that fantasy world. We belong in our mundane world of everyday life. And we might draw that conclusion because we too are familiar with that as an ending to a magic land story. Here it is.
There's no place like home.
Wake up, honey.
There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place.
Dorothy, dear. It's Aunt Em, darling.
Oh, Annie Em, it's you.
Yes, darling.
Hello there. Anybody home? I just dropped by because I heard the little girl got caught in the big... Well, she seems all right now.
Yeah, she got quite a bump on the head. We kind of thought there for a minute she was going to leave us.
Oh.
But I did leave you, Uncle Henry. That's just the trouble. And I tried to get back for days and days.
There, lie quiet now. You just had a bad dream.
Sure. Remember me?
Your old pal, Hunk?
Oh.
Me? Hickory? You couldn't forget my face, could you?
But it wasn't a dream. It was a place. And you were there.
Oh.
But you couldn't have been, could you?
Oh, we dream lots of silly things when we...
No, Aunt Em. This was a real, truly live place. And I remember that some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful. But just the same, all I kept saying to everybody was, I want to go home. And they sent me home. Doesn't anybody believe me?
Of course we believe you, Dorothy.
Oh, but anyway, Toto, we're home. Home. And this is my room. And you're all here. And I'm not going to leave here ever, ever again. Because I love you all. And, oh, Auntie Em, there's no place like home.
Earlier in the movie, Dorothy tells the good witch, if I ever go looking for my heart's desire, I won't go any further than my own backyard, because if I don't find it there, I won't find it anywhere. And that's the lesson of at least the MGM version of The Wizard of Oz. We don't belong in that magic world. We belong in the world of ordinary life. And in some ways, that's the lesson of the Odyssey, too. Odysseus tries to go back home, and again, like Dorothy says, eventually people send him home. And he realizes that's where he belongs, not in this world of warriors, not in this world of magical gods and demons. Well, is that the lesson of The Flying Dutchman? Does it teach us that this seemingly exciting world of magic and fantasy and dreams, as exciting as that may be, that's not where we belong? Well, that depends on our experience. And directors give us different choices. We also may make different choices and interpret it in different ways depending on where we are in our lives. And all of that's possible because of all the different pieces of tradition and literature that Wagner has pulled together. He's got all of these different ingredients that he draws upon for The Flying Dutchman. He's got traditional literary themes like the theme of the Nostos, the theme of the homecoming. That's part of his potion. He's got aspects of German culture like Hier stehe ich, the quote from Martin Luther that he puts into his drama. He's got poetic imagery. He's got the image of sailing. He's got the image of dreams. He's got the image of the storm. He's got Gothic ghost stories like the Flying Dutchman legend itself. He's got other elements of popular culture that show up in our romantic comedies, but were well known in the plays of his own day. And most of all, he has his own genius, his own way of recrafting these stories and putting together elements that we might not have thought of putting together and creating his own particular drama that becomes the Flying Dutchman, that we can see time and time again, and each time see a new story, a different way of approaching this work, because that's what a classic is, a work that you can return to again and again and again, and it's always new. Well, if you want to find out more about these ideas, you might take a look at Classically Romantic. That's my book of how Wagner was influenced by the classical tradition, especially in creating The Ring. Or Eternal Dreamer, which consists of the lectures I gave at Bayreuth, focusing on the imagery of Wagner. And what you heard now is explained in an expanded version as chapter 3 of that book. Or if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, you could read my opera mysteries. There are now 9 of them. Hot Salome just came out, and Monteverdi is going to be the last volume in the series, will be out in the fall. The Wagnerian drama is the first one, Die Meistersinger. You might want to take a look at those. But for now, I want to thank you for listening this afternoon and joining with me for our discussion of The Flying Dutchman. And I hope that at least I've been able to provide some ways in which you can approach this work differently or from a different perspective the next time you see it. So thank you very much for sharing your time with me. As I understand it now, we're going to have some possibility for people to ask questions, and they will be posed to me, and I will answer them if I can get out of this. There we go. Let's see.
Well,
Jeff, stop screen share. Yeah.
I had to find the button. That was my problem. I have it now. Let's see if I can start my video. Just not coming out. Give me a second and the video will start. But if people have questions, perhaps I can start them before.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Buller. That was a fascinating, absolutely fascinating lecture. I'll tell you, I'll never see Wizard of Oz again. I'll see it in a different light, that's for sure. From all the times I've seen it as
you didn't realize the Wizard of Oz was as Wagnerian as that.
Right. We do have one question from Kirk Davis. Professor Buller, what do you think Dutchman is about? What is the most important subtext?
Well, and that's a real hard question for me to answer, because it implies that I think the Dutchman is about one thing and only one thing. As I hope I've made clear, it has all of these different facets. It's kind of like a diamond. You can look at it in different ways. But for me, at this point in my life, what the Dutchman tends to remind me of is that there are things in life that are more fearful than death. We see the Dutchman who is cursed with immortality and what that means to him. And as one gets older, you tend to think these thoughts more. What you think at the age of 70, which I am now, are very different from what you think at the age of 17. And I think my approach to the Dutchman now is this sort of reminder of what life is about or should be about, and how we can use the time we have available to us to make it meaningful to ourselves and others, and to serve others, offer them a sort of redemption, which sounds a bit grand, but offer them a bit of help and assistance to make their world a little bit kinder and a little bit happier. So to me right now at this moment, that's what I tend to see in productions of the Dutchman. Thank you for that very interesting question.
Thank you. There's another question from David Dalto. I loved the rom-com comparison. Can we then see it as a very, very dark comedy?
I think so. I think that's one way of seeing it. I know that there have been a lot there's been a lot written about how Wagner was not just influenced by the high literature, the high culture of his day, but also by popular culture, by plays and novels that were being written in his time. And so I think that these comparisons I make to modern rom-coms, that's not inappropriate for what some of the elements that Wagner is using here. So I think, yes, if you want to approach the Flying Dutchman as a dark comedy, I think that's perfectly fine. It does, in some ways, have a happy ending. The boy and the girl get together at the end, in death, it may be, but that's what makes it a dark comedy. But they do get together. It's not a tragedy like Hamlet or Macbeth. It does in its own way have a happy ending. So I think that's a perfectly fine way of approaching.
Thank you. And any other questions from anybody?
Emma has a question.
Yes, I have a question about the religious underpinnings of the Flying Dutchman. After all, the Dutchman is stuck in limbo. He is basically dead, but he cannot go to hell or to heaven. And his goal is to get to heaven. And it takes a sacrifice, a human sacrifice on the center to him where he wants to be. Both of them go up, they do not go down. This is a deeply religious thought, that the salvation is necessary to achieve the goal of every Christian soul, that is to get to heaven. And how can we view it today when religious thought, the Christian religious thought, is not necessarily the driving thought in the society? There are other thoughts.
I think we can view it historically, but it's interesting that you raise that point, because Wagner himself, even though everything that you say is true, felt free to embody very similar thoughts in a sort of non-Christian dress, because in the Ring too, you have this need for a woman to make a sacrifice at the end in the immolation scene to redeem Wotan, and basically telling a Christian message in non-Christian dress. And I think that as people in society who are exposed to different traditions and can understand things that have come to us from different ways, even if, and I'm going to say something that I hope doesn't offend anyone, but even if we don't believe those things, just as nowadays we don't believe that there was an Oedipus who lived and gouged out his eyes, but we can still see Oedipus the king and be terribly moved by that. Even people who don't accept the Christian message can see these stories and find some meaning to them, that there's a need for us to sacrifice, or to be sacrificed, to be redeemed in some way. Each of us needs some way to be redeemed. And I think if each of us thinks about our past, we can think of something that we've done that we need to be redeemed for. And whether or not we accept the Christian message, this drama, as does Parsifal, speaks to us in terms of the sort of redemption we might be able to have. So I think that's the way in which we might see it in modern society, where, as you say, there is a very different cultural worldview than Wagner's original audience had, where basically it was a very homogeneous audience in terms of their religious perspective.
Well, any other questions from any members before we start wrapping things up?
I have a note. Yeah, and Andy, you and I and many others saw this production in Leipzig, where the ghost ship drives at you, and it becomes bigger and bigger. And I sat in the seventh row, and I thought I'll be able to touch it. It was above my head. I couldn't touch it, though I tried. And this frenetic activity of ghosts on the ship, those pirate-like skeletons who were literally scurrying all over the ship, and the tempo was so fast. It's a highly memorable picture and an impression that I'll never forget. For me now, it's the gold standard.
No, I productions where the ship just intrudes into our world like that. It's a very dramatic thing. So I'm glad you both got to see that.
Yeah, many others here too.
One more question from David Dalto. Hollander was long pre-Schopenhauer/Tristan. What was death to Wagner at this point? Does the relationship persist post-mortem?
Well, as you say, this is many years before he read Schopenhauer. I think the reason why Schopenhauer resonates with him is not that those ideas were new to him and he only learned them from Schopenhauer, despite some impressions he gives us in My Leben, but rather I think he resonated with Schopenhauer's work because he'd already had those thoughts. And I think that at this point in his life, this idea that the world is illusion and it's not everything there is, they're already beginning to crystallize in Wagner's mind. And so I think this pre-Schopenhauerian view that Wagner has is very similar to ideas he's going to develop throughout his life to the very end of it. But I think we can see the beginnings of it here in The Flying Dutchman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Then, Emma, I guess you wanted to make a few announcements, right?
I want you to tell us about our next, oh God, if I find it now, about our next activities at the Wagner Society, but please forgive me, I need to find my slides. I'm sorry. I'll be there in a moment. In a short moment. Yeah. Mamma mia. Okay, Wagner Society.
Well, I'll start talking while you're looking.
You start talking about it, and I'll find it. Sorry.
May 8th at 5 p.m. at the Suppenküche restaurant we will have our annual Richard Wagner birthday celebration. The announcements and official sign up is not going out until 1 month before, which will be April 8th. And you'll be able to sign up online. This is members only. If you have not yet renewed your membership, please renew because you cannot go to this event otherwise. Members only, and even at that, the space is limited to about 20 to 25 people. So it'll be important to sign up early. Let's see. Anything else, Emma?
Well, do you have the slide?
I don't have the slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Share. Okay. Slide. Share. How about now? Yes.
Still black.
Yes, and then also June 7th, we're actually going to have a series of lectures about Parsifal, seeing that this season San Francisco Opera is performing Parsifal. It's appropriate that we spend some time studying it. June 7th, we will have a lecture by Kip Krana on the quest for the Grail. That will be one of our live in-person lectures at the Jewish Community Center. Let me just give a quick rundown of the rest of the year. July 26th at 1 p.m. via Zoom, we will have part 1 of a 2-part lecture series on Wagner and Nietzsche, given by Nicholas Krusik from Simon Fraser University. Part 1 will be on July 26th at 1 o'clock. Part 2 will be September 6th at 1 o'clock. Continuing on with the Parsifal discussions, October 18th at 1 p.m., again via Zoom, we will have one of our longtime former members, Paul Schofield, discussing the topic of the Redeemer Reborn, Parsifal as the 5th opera of Wagner's Ring. As many of you know, Paul wrote a very excellent book on the subject, and I think it's time we revisit that. November 1st, a live in-person lecture, 1 p.m. at the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco. Professor Thomas Gray, Professor of Music Emeritus and Professor of German Studies at Stanford University, will be talking about sacred spaces in Parsifal. And then December 6th, mark your calendars, will be our annual Cosima Party holiday celebration. Details to be announced, but it will probably be one that you won't want to miss. I'll just tell you that. That's it.
Oh, Andy, with your permission, I want to mention that I sent an email today to our members. This email is about the Calpidranti paintings that we have in our possession, and we need to really find good homes for all of them, if possible. We decided as a board of directors not to rent the warehouse for the sake of these few paintings. It's getting very expensive. So please, if you didn't get this email, please let me know and I'll resend it to you. Otherwise, please take a minute to look through these fabulous paintings and consider taking one of them or two of them, depends on the size of your house. So please, folks, we don't want them destroyed. Calpidranti was a favorite artist of the Wagner brothers in the heyday of their management at Bayreuth, and we need to honor this.
And you just reminded me of a few other things. I apologize to any of you who might have tried to renew online recently. Our website was not accepting credit card payments for a period of time, but that is working better now. So if you have not renewed and that is what held you back, please go online today and renew. Also, we alluded very briefly in the past to the fact that this is our 40th anniversary of incorporation. Society existed before incorporation, but we're using the date of incorporation as our official anniversary date. And we are going to be starting a 40th anniversary fundraising campaign during which we would like to raise $40,000. Be on the lookout for this campaign. I'm mentioning it now because hopefully all of you are getting big tax rebates. So if you're trying to figure out what to do with all that money you're getting back from your taxes, I know a good place for it. So thank you. Anything else, Emma?
Judy Oyan says, great lecture. Thank you so much.
Yes,
and I seconded.
Thank you, Professor Buller. It was outstanding. We always enjoy having you. We look forward to having you again at some point in the future.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Glad to join you again.
Great.
Thank you. And please send me your mailing address.
My mailing address. All right.
Your mailing address.
Or
maybe PayPal number or yeah.
Either one.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bye.